In the shadowy corridors of power within Nazi Germany, a quiet rebellion simmered beneath the surface of an oppressive regime. By 1942, the machinery of the Third Reich operated with chilling efficiency, orchestrating the systematic deportation of Jews and other marginalized groups. Yet, amid the cold calculations of bureaucratic orders, a group of secretaries often overlooked and underestimated began to wield a power that could alter the fates of countless lives. They were the unseen guardians of humanity, navigating a treacherous landscape where each decision could mean the difference between life and death. The secretaries, primarily women who had entered the workforce in response to the demands of war, found themselves at a crossroads. Tasked with processing deportation orders and managing the relentless flow of paperwork that dictated the fate of individuals, they were acutely aware of the moral weight of their roles. Each file that crossed their desks represented not just a name, but a family, a story, and a future extinguished by the regime's ruthless policies. As trains departed from cities like Berlin, Munich, and Hamburg, bound for ghettos and concentration camps, these secretaries began to question their complicity in the machinery of oppression. Their internal struggle ignited a flicker of resistance, as they sought ways to subvert the very system that sought to dehumanize their fellow citizens. This narrative explores the profound implications of their actions, revealing how small acts of defiance could ripple through the fabric of a society gripped by fear and hatred. To fully grasp the significance of the secretaries' actions, it is essential to understand the historical context of Nazi Germany in 1942. The regime, under Adolf Hitler's leadership, had established a totalitarian state characterized by pervasive surveillance, propaganda, and a bureaucratic system designed to enforce its ideologies. The Holocaust, a systematic genocide aimed at exterminating the Jewish population, was in full swing, with millions already displaced or murdered by this point in the war. The bureaucratic machinery that facilitated these atrocities was vast and intricate. It included not only the infamous Gestapo and SS, but also a network of civil servants, clerks, and secretaries who executed the regime's orders with chilling precision. The offices of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, in Berlin served as the nerve center for the implementation of anti-Jewish policies, where thousands of documents were processed daily. Each deportation order, each denunciation file, was meticulously crafted and disseminated, creating a chilling rhythm of oppression that echoed throughout the country. In this environment, secretaries played a crucial role. Many were young women who had taken on jobs in the civil service as men were conscripted into the military. They were often educated and skilled, yet their positions were typically viewed as subordinate. However, their access to sensitive information and their ability to manipulate bureaucratic processes placed them in a unique position of power. They could delay orders, misplace files, or even alter documents, actions that could buy precious time for those at risk. Life in Nazi Germany during this period was marked by fear and uncertainty. The regime's propaganda machine worked tirelessly to instill loyalty and obedience, portraying Jews and other targeted groups as enemies of the state. Daily life for the average citizen was punctuated by the constant threat of denunciation, where neighbors could turn against one another, and the Gestapo's reach extended into every corner of society. The atmosphere was one of paranoia, as individuals navigated a landscape where trust was a rare commodity. Yet, amidst this climate of fear, the secretaries began to forge connections with those whose lives they were impacting. They witnessed the anguish of families facing deportation, the desperation in the eyes of parents trying to protect their children, and the heartbreak of communities being torn apart. These experiences ignited a moral awakening within some secretaries, prompting them to contemplate the implications of their work. They began to understand that their actions, however small, could serve as a lifeline for those in peril. The logistics of resistance within the bureaucratic system were fraught with challenges. The Gestapo maintained a vigilant watch over the civil service, ensuring that the machinery of oppression functioned smoothly. Secretaries operated under constant scrutiny, aware that any deviation from protocol could lead to severe consequences. Yet, the moral imperative to act outweighed the risks for many. They devised subtle strategies to delay deportation orders, often relying on their intimate knowledge of the bureaucratic processes to create buffers for those at risk. For instance, some secretaries would intentionally misplace files related to deportation orders, allowing families to slip through the cracks of the system. Others would introduce errors into the paperwork, causing delays that bought precious time for those targeted by the regime. These acts of defiance, while seemingly minor in the grand scheme of the Nazi machine, were revolutionary in their potential to save lives. They represented a flicker of hope in a world dominated by darkness. During the year progressed, the Secretaries' actions began to yield tangible results. Families who had been granted additional time managed to escape, finding refuge in safer territories or underground networks that offered protection. The Secretaries, aware of the lives they were saving, found a renewed sense of purpose in their work. Their quiet rebellion, though fraught with danger, offered a glimmer of hope in a world overshadowed by despair. The moral dilemmas faced by these secretaries were compounded by the realities of daily life in Nazi Germany. Many were torn between their responsibilities to the state and the growing awareness of the atrocities being committed in its name. The regime's propaganda painted a picture of a unified nation fighting against perceived enemies, yet the secretaries witnessed the human cost of this ideology firsthand. They grappled with the knowledge that their actions could either perpetuate the cycle of violence or disrupt it, leading to a profound internal struggle. The Secretaries' defiance was not without its challenges. The Gestapo's watchful eye loomed large, and the consequences of discovery were dire. Many secretaries faced the threat of arrest, imprisonment, or worse if their acts of resistance were uncovered. Yet, driven by a deep-seated belief in the sanctity of human life, they persevered, often relying on their camaraderie with one another to bolster their resolve. They formed quiet alliances, sharing information and strategies that could aid in their efforts to protect those at risk. While the war continued, the Secretaries' actions laid the groundwork for a broader movement against the regime's dehumanizing policies. Their quiet rebellion, though largely unrecognized at the time, became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. In a society where fear reigned supreme, these women emerged as unsung heroes, embodying the courage to stand against tyranny and oppression. In summary, the context of Nazi Germany in 1942 provides a crucial backdrop for understanding the Secretaries' actions. The bureaucratic machinery of oppression, coupled with the pervasive atmosphere of fear and paranoia, created a complex landscape in which moral choices were fraught with peril. Yet, amid this darkness, the Secretaries found the strength to resist, demonstrating that even in the most oppressive environments, the human spirit can rise to challenge the forces of tyranny. As the clandestine acts of defiance among the Secretaries gained momentum, the stakes grew higher. Each day, the Clerks navigated a treacherous landscape, where the slightest miscalculation could lead to dire consequences. The Gestapo, with its pervasive network of informants and spies, was ever watchful, ready to pounce on any sign of dissent. The Secretaries understood that their small acts of rebellion, while life-saving for some, could also lead to their own demise. In the dimly lit offices of the Reich Ministry of the Interior, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The clattering of typewriters and the rustling of papers masked the whispers of fear and resolve that permeated the air. Among the Secretaries, a growing camaraderie developed, forged by shared values and the weight of their moral choices. They began to confide in one another, exchanging stories of families they had helped and the faces of those who had been spared from the clutches of the regime. One such secretary, Anna Müller, had become a pivotal figure in this underground network of resistance. With her meticulous attention to detail, she had learned to manipulate the bureaucratic system to her advantage. Anna's desk was cluttered with files, but she had a system one that allowed her to identify which deportation orders could be delayed or altered. Each time she successfully bought a family more time, her heart swelled with a mix of triumph and dread. She knew that for every life saved, there was an equal risk of being discovered. The Gestapo's methods were ruthless, and the consequences of being caught were severe. Secretaries who were suspected of subversion faced immediate arrest, interrogation, and often, a grim fate in the very camps they were complicit in sending others to. Anna had heard stories of colleagues who had vanished overnight, leaving behind only whispers of their bravery. The fear of being next loomed large, yet the thought of inaction was unbearable. In the face of such peril, the secretaries devised a code of conduct, a silent agreement to protect one another. They would share information discreetly, using innocuous language in their conversations to avoid drawing attention. A simple mention of the weather could signal a warning, while a discussion about family matters could indicate a need for assistance. This web of communication became their lifeline, a means to coordinate their efforts without arousing suspicion. As the summer of 1942 wore on, the deportations intensified, and the secretaries found themselves increasingly overwhelmed. The sheer volume of orders flooded their desks, each one a reminder of the lives hanging in the balance. The pressure mounted, and the secretaries had to make difficult choices about which files to prioritize for delay. Each decision weighed heavily on their conscience, as they grappled with the reality that their actions could mean the difference between life and death. One fateful day, Anna received a file that would change everything. It contained the deportation order for the Weiss family, a Jewish family she had come to know through her work. The Weisses had been living in fear, their lives shattered by the regime's policies. Anna had previously managed to delay the deportation, but this time, the order was marked as urgent. The Gestapo was tightening its grip, and the clock was ticking. With her heart racing, Anna knew she had to act quickly. She meticulously crafted a series of errors in the paperwork, ensuring that the order would be delayed once more. However, this time, the risks were greater. The Gestapo had begun to scrutinize the clerical processes more closely, and any discrepancies could easily lead to her exposure. As she submitted the altered documents, Anna felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were filled with dread. Anna's colleagues noticed her unease, but she brushed off their concerns, determined to maintain her composure. She continued her work, but her mind was consumed by thoughts of the Weisses. Would her actions be enough to save them? Or would the Gestapo uncover her deception, leading to her arrest and the of her quiet rebellion? As the weeks passed, the tension in the office escalated. The Gestapo's presence became more pronounced, with agents frequently visiting to oversee the bureaucratic processes. The secretaries exchanged nervous glances, aware that their small acts of defiance were becoming increasingly perilous. The atmosphere was charged with fear, yet the resolve among them remained unbroken. They were united by a common purpose, a shared belief that their actions, however small, could make a difference. Then, one afternoon, the unthinkable happened. Anna was summoned to the office of her supervisor, a stern man known for his unwavering loyalty to the regime. As she entered his office, her heart raced. She could sense that something was amiss. The supervisor's expression was grave, and Anna felt a chill run down her spine. "Frau Müller," he began, his voice low and measured, "we have reason to believe that there are clerks in this office who are not adhering to protocol. There have been reports of discrepancies in the deportation orders. You are to be vigilant and report any irregularities immediately." Anna's mind raced. Had her actions been discovered? The weight of her secret felt heavier than ever. She nodded, feigning compliance, but inside, she was a tempest of fear and resolve. The warning was clear. The Gestapo was tightening its grip, and any misstep could lead to her undoing. In the days that followed, Anna felt the walls closing in around her. She continued her work, but every keystroke felt like a gamble. The pressure to conform was immense, and she could sense the paranoia creeping into the office. Colleagues who had once shared in her quiet rebellion now seemed hesitant, their eyes darting nervously as they processed the growing scrutiny. Yet, amid the fear, Anna's determination only deepened. She knew she could not abandon the Weisses, nor could she betray the trust of her fellow secretaries. The cost of courage was steep, but the price of inaction was far greater. As the summer sun began to set on the horizon, casting long shadows across the office, Anna resolved to continue her fight, even if it meant risking everything. In the weeks that followed, the Gestapo's presence became more oppressive. Agents began to conduct surprise inspections, scrutinizing the clerical work with an eagle eye. The secretaries, no longer a united front, operated in a state of heightened anxiety. Each day felt like a tightrope walk, balancing the need to fulfill their duties while safeguarding their clandestine acts of defiance. Anna's heart raced as she processed the latest batch of deportation orders. The urgency of the situation weighed heavily on her, and she felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She had to act, but the risks were greater than ever. The Gestapo was watching, and any mistake could lead to her exposure. In a moment of desperation, Anna reached out to a trusted colleague, Clara, who had also shown signs of dissent. They met in secret, away from the prying eyes of their supervisors. In hushed tones, they discussed their fears and the growing dangers they faced. Clara had also been delaying orders, but the pressure was mounting. Together, they devised a plan to create a network of support among their fellow secretaries, a way to share information and coordinate their efforts without drawing attention. As they left their clandestine meeting, Anna felt a renewed sense of purpose. The cost of courage was high, but the potential to save lives outweighed the risks. They were not alone in their fight. They were part of a larger movement, a quiet rebellion that could challenge the oppressive machinery of the regime. Yet, as the summer turned to autumn, the stakes continued to rise. The Gestapo's grip on the bureaucracy tightened, and the secretaries faced an increasingly perilous landscape. Anna knew that the time for action was now. She had to find a way to protect not only the vices but also her fellow secretaries who had joined her in this dangerous game of defiance. The cost of courage was steep, but the price of inaction was far greater. As the shadows lengthened in the office, Anna steeled herself for the challenges that lay ahead. She was determined to continue her fight, even if it meant risking everything to save the lives of those who had been condemned by the regime. As autumn descended upon Nazi Germany, the atmosphere within the bureaucratic offices grew increasingly fraught with tension. The Gestapo's relentless scrutiny had instilled a sense of paranoia among the secretaries, yet the flicker of resistance continued to burn brightly within their hearts. The small acts of defiance that had begun as isolated gestures were now coalescing into a more organized effort, a network of solidarity that transcended individual fears. Anna and Clara, having forged a bond through their shared commitment to saving lives, began to reach out to other secretaries who had shown signs of dissent. They organized clandestine meetings in the back rooms of cafes and quiet corners of parks, where they could discuss their strategies without the ever-watchful eyes of the regime. The secretaries shared stories of families they had helped, and the weight of their collective burden began to lighten as they realized they were not alone in their fight. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Anna and Clara gathered a small group of like-minded secretaries in a secluded park. The air was thick with anticipation as they exchanged ideas and experiences, each woman bringing her unique perspective to the table. They spoke of the families they had saved, the lives they had touched, and the moral imperative that drove them to act against the regime's oppressive policies. As they shared their stories, a sense of camaraderie blossomed among them. They were no longer just clerks processing paperwork. They were part of a movement, a collective force pushing back against the tide of dehumanization. The secretaries began to strategize, discussing ways to amplify their efforts and create a more significant impact within the bureaucratic machinery. One of the secretaries, a young woman named Greta, proposed an audacious plan. What if we could create a system to track the deportation orders? We could identify patterns and anticipate when families are at risk. If we work together, we could save more lives. The idea sparked a wave of enthusiasm among the group, and they began to brainstorm ways to implement it. Over the following weeks, the secretaries worked tirelessly to develop a clandestine tracking system. They used coded language in their communications and devised a method for sharing information without drawing attention. Each secretary would keep a record of deportation orders, noting any discrepancies or delays, and they would meet regularly to exchange updates. The risk was immense, but the potential to save lives outweighed their fears. As the network grew, so did their resolve. The secretaries became more adept at navigating the bureaucratic landscape, learning to manipulate the system to their advantage. They developed a keen understanding of the inner workings of the Gestapo and the processes that governed deportations. With each successful intervention, their confidence grew, and they began to see themselves not merely as clerks but as agents of change. However, the Gestapo was not blind to the shifting dynamics within the bureaucracy. As the secretaries' network expanded, the regime's paranoia intensified. Agents began to conduct more frequent inspections, searching for any signs of dissent. The atmosphere in the offices became increasingly oppressive, and the secretaries were acutely aware that their actions could lead to severe consequences. One fateful day, Anna received a chilling report from a fellow secretary. A colleague had been arrested after a routine inspection revealed discrepancies in her paperwork. The news sent shockwaves through the network, and the reality of their situation hit hard. The Gestapo was closing in, and the risk of exposure was greater than ever. In the wake of the arrest, the secretaries convened to discuss their next steps. Fear hung heavy in the air, but Anna's resolve remained unshaken. "We cannot let fear dictate our actions," she urged her colleagues. "We have come too far to turn back now. We must find a way to continue our work while protecting ourselves." The group brainstormed strategies to minimize their risks. They decided to diversify their efforts, spreading their acts of defiance across different offices to avoid drawing attention to any one location. They also agreed to establish a system of signals, using innocuous phrases in their conversations to indicate when they needed to be cautious or when it was safe to proceed. As the weeks turned into months, the secretaries continued their fight against the regime's oppressive policies. They worked in the shadows, their actions often unnoticed by the outside world. Yet, within the confines of their offices, they were engaged in a battle for humanity, each small act of defiance a testament to their courage and resilience. The ripple effect of their actions began to manifest in unexpected ways. Families who had been spared from deportation started to share their stories, spreading word of the secretaries' bravery. As news of their efforts circulated, more individuals began to seek refuge, and the network expanded beyond the confines of the bureaucracy. The secretaries became a lifeline for those in need, offering hope in a time of despair. Yet, the Gestapo's grip remained unyielding. The regime's paranoia reached a fever pitch, leading to an increase in arrests and crackdowns on dissent. The secretaries were acutely aware that their actions could lead to severe consequences, but the thought of inaction was unbearable. They had witnessed the horrors of the regime firsthand, and the moral imperative to act outweighed their fears. In the face of such adversity, Anna found solace in the bonds she had forged with her fellow secretaries. They became a source of strength for one another, sharing not only their fears but also their hopes for a better future. Together, they navigated the treacherous waters of the bureaucratic machinery, each act of defiance a testament to their unwavering commitment to humanity. As winter approached, the atmosphere grew colder, both outside and within the offices. The secretaries continued their work, but the weight of their actions pressed heavily on their shoulders. They were acutely aware that the Gestapo was watching, and the risks were greater than ever. Yet, their resolve remained unbroken. One evening, as Anna sat at her desk, she received a visit from Clara. The urgency in her friend's eyes spoke volumes. "We need to talk," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's been a shift in the regime's tactics. They're targeting individuals in our network." Anna's heart sank. The reality of their situation had become more dire than ever. They had to act quickly to protect themselves and the families they had been working to save. Together, They devised a plan to create a safe haven for those at risk, a place where families could find refuge until the danger passed. As they worked to implement their plan, the Secretaries' network continued to grow. They reached out to trusted allies outside the bureaucracy, forging connections with individuals who shared their commitment to resistance. The ripple effect of their actions began to take shape, as more people joined the fight against the regime's oppressive policies. In the face of overwhelming odds, the Secretaries stood united, their courage shining brightly against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. They were not just clerks, they were agents of change, fighting for a future where humanity would prevail over tyranny. As the winter months wore on, the Secretaries' resolve only deepened. They knew the risks, but they also understood the power of their collective actions. Each small act of defiance, each life saved, was a testament to their unwavering commitment to humanity. The cost of courage was steep, but the price of inaction was far greater. In the heart of Nazi Germany, amid the oppressive machinery of the regime, the Secretaries continued their fight, their quiet rebellion a beacon of hope in a world overshadowed by darkness. As the year 1943 dawned, the clandestine actions of the Secretaries began to yield both unforeseen consequences and a heightened sense of urgency. The Nazi regime, increasingly aware of the cracks in its bureaucratic machinery, intensified its scrutiny of civil servants, particularly those in positions that could affect the implementation of deportation orders. The Gestapo's watchful eye became a constant presence, and the atmosphere of fear permeated the offices where these Secretaries worked. The Secretaries' small acts of rebellion, misplaced files, delayed orders, and altered documents had begun to accumulate, creating a ripple effect that allowed some families to escape the clutches of the regime. However, with each life saved, the stakes grew higher. The Gestapo's response to these disruptions was swift and brutal. They launched investigations into the clerical ranks, seeking to root out any signs of dissent. Secretaries who had previously felt a sense of moral clarity now faced the grim reality of their choices. In one notable instance, a secretary named Greta Müller, who had been instrumental in delaying a deportation order for a Jewish family in Berlin, found herself summoned for questioning. The Gestapo had received an anonymous tip about irregularities in her office, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Greta's heart raced as she entered the dimly lit interrogation room, where the air was heavy with the weight of unspoken threats. The officer, a steely-eyed man with a reputation for ruthlessness, leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "Do you think you can play with the lives of others without consequences?" he asked, his gaze piercing through her. Greta, acutely aware of the gravity of her actions, felt the walls closing in. She had saved lives, but at what cost? The moral dilemmas she faced were no longer abstract, they were visceral and immediate. As the Gestapo tightened its grip, the Secretaries began to form informal networks, sharing strategies and information to protect one another. They understood that their collective strength lay in their ability to act discreetly, to support one another in the face of overwhelming odds. These networks became lifelines, allowing them to coordinate their efforts and provide mutual aid. However, the risk of betrayal loomed large, and the consequences of discovery were dire. The turning point came in the spring of 1943, when a series of high-profile arrests sent shockwaves through the ranks of the Secretaries. Several of Greta's colleagues were taken into custody, accused of subversion and treason. The news spread like wildfire, igniting fear and paranoia among those who had dared to resist. The Gestapo's message was clear: dissent would not be tolerated. In the wake of these arrests, many Secretaries faced a harrowing choice: continue their acts of defiance and risk their lives, or retreat into compliance and silence. The moral weight of their decisions pressed heavily upon them. For some, the choice was simple. They could not bear the thought of contributing to the regime's atrocities, even if it meant facing the consequences. Others, however, chose self-preservation, rationalizing their compliance as a means of survival. The consequences of these choices reverberated throughout the bureaucratic landscape. Those who continued to resist found themselves increasingly isolated, their networks fractured by fear and suspicion. The Gestapo's tactics of intimidation and surveillance had succeeded in sowing discord among the ranks, undermining the solidarity that had once fueled the quiet rebellion. As the summer of 1943 approached, the Secretaries' actions began to take on a new urgency. The deportations escalated, and the reality of the Holocaust became increasingly apparent. Families were torn apart, communities were shattered, and the grim specter of death loomed over the lives of those who remained. The Secretaries, now acutely aware of the stakes, grappled with the moral implications of their work. Each day brought new challenges, and the burden of their choices weighed heavily on their conscience. In the face of this escalating crisis, some Secretaries took bold steps to amplify their resistance. They began to document the atrocities they witnessed, creating clandestine records of the regime's actions. These accounts, often written in secret and shared only among trusted colleagues, served as a testament to the horrors unfolding around them. The act of documenting became an act of defiance in itself, a way to bear witness to the suffering and injustice that permeated their world. Yet, as the consequences of their actions mounted, the Secretaries also faced the harsh reality that their efforts might not be enough to stem the tide of oppression. The regime's machinery was relentless, and the weight of their moral dilemmas grew heavier with each passing day. The turning point had arrived, and the Secretaries found themselves at a crossroads, grappling with the consequences of their choices and the uncertain path that lay ahead. The aftermath of the Secretaries' resistance unfolded in a landscape marked by both despair and transformation. As the summer of 1943 gave way to autumn, the brutal realities of the Holocaust became increasingly undeniable. The deportations continued unabated, and the once vibrant communities of Jews and other targeted groups were systematically dismantled. The Secretaries, who had once believed their small acts of defiance could make a difference, faced the grim truth that their efforts were but a drop in the ocean of suffering. For many Secretaries, the emotional toll of their choices became unbearable. The weight of the lives they could not save haunted them, and the moral dilemmas they had grappled with transformed into a profound sense of guilt and sorrow. Greta Müller, who had once felt a sense of purpose in her resistance, found herself plagued by nightmares of the families she had tried to protect. The faces of those she could not save loomed large in her mind, a constant reminder of the limits of her power. In the wake of the intensified deportations, the Secretaries' networks began to evolve. No longer merely focused on delaying orders, they transformed into clandestine support systems for those in need. They provided information about safe houses, forged documents, and facilitated escape routes for families at risk. The Secretaries became a lifeline for many, embodying a spirit of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. However, the risks associated with these actions were greater than ever. The Gestapo's crackdown on dissent had intensified, and the climate of fear permeated every aspect of life. Secretaries who had once operated in the shadows now found themselves under constant surveillance, their every move scrutinized. The stakes had never been higher, and the consequences of discovery could be fatal. In this atmosphere of fear, the Secretaries' transformation took on a dual nature. On one hand, they became symbols of resistance, embodying the courage to stand against tyranny. On the other hand, they were also deeply affected by the trauma of their experiences. Many struggled with feelings of helplessness, grappling with the knowledge that their actions, while noble, could not halt the tide of destruction that engulfed their world. In the later years of the war dragged on, the Secretaries faced the reality of their own mortality. The threat of arrest loomed large, and the specter of the concentration camps became an ever-present fear. Some Secretaries chose to go underground, adopting new identities and living in constant fear of discovery. Others remained in their positions, hoping to continue their work in secret, even as the risks escalated. The transformation of the Secretaries was not only personal but also collective. They began to share their stories, documenting their experiences in secret journals and letters. These accounts, filled with the raw emotions of their struggles, became a testament to their resilience and humanity. The act of recording their experiences served as a form of catharsis, allowing them to process the trauma they had endured and the choices they had made. In the later years of the war neared its conclusion in 1945, the Secretaries' transformation took on a new urgency. With the Allied forces advancing and the Nazi regime in disarray, the Secretaries found themselves at a pivotal moment in history. The choices they had made, the lives they had touched, and the resistance they had embodied would soon be put to the test. In the final months of the war, the Secretaries faced a choice: to continue their resistance in the face of impending collapse or to seek refuge and safety for themselves. Many chose to remain, driven by a sense of duty to those they had tried to protect. They understood that the war would not erase the suffering they had witnessed, nor would it absolve them of the moral dilemmas they had faced. The aftermath of their resistance was a complex tapestry of hope and despair. While the war would eventually come to an end, the scars it left behind would linger long after the last shots were fired. The Secretaries, transformed by their experiences, emerged from the shadows with a renewed sense of purpose. They understood that their stories, their struggles, and their acts of defiance were not just personal narratives, they were part of a larger tapestry of resistance against oppression. As the dust settled on the ruins of the Nazi regime, the Secretaries found themselves grappling with the legacy of their actions. They had borne witness to the depths of human cruelty, but they had also demonstrated the power of compassion and courage. Their transformation, forged in the crucible of war, would shape their lives in ways they could not yet comprehend. In the years that followed, the Secretaries would carry the weight of their experiences with them, forever changed by the choices they had made. Their stories would become part of the collective memory of a generation that had faced unimaginable horrors. The aftermath of their resistance would echo through history, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of tyranny. As the dust of World War II settled and the Nazi regime crumbled, the world was left to grapple with the staggering consequences of the Holocaust and the moral failures that allowed such atrocities to occur. The wars in 1945 did not mark a conclusion to the stories of those who had resisted the regime from within its own ranks, particularly the Secretaries who had quietly defied orders and delayed deportation notices. Their actions, though often overlooked in the grand narrative of resistance, would resonate through history, shaping discussions about moral courage, complicity, and the human capacity for empathy in the face of systemic evil. In the immediate aftermath of the war, Europe was engulfed in a process of reckoning. The Nuremberg trials, which began in late 1945, sought to bring Nazi war criminals to justice, but they also opened a Pandora's box of moral questions. How could ordinary individuals, many of whom were simply following orders, be held accountable for their roles in the Holocaust? The trials highlighted the complexities of individual responsibility within a totalitarian regime, and the Secretaries who had delayed deportation orders became emblematic of the moral dilemmas faced by those who worked within the Nazi bureaucracy. While some Secretaries faced prosecution for their roles in the regime, others were celebrated for their acts of defiance. The narratives of these women began to emerge, albeit slowly, as historians and survivors sought to document the hidden stories of resistance. The Secretaries' actions were not merely acts of rebellion, they were profound statements of humanity in a system designed to strip individuals of their dignity. Their legacy would eventually contribute to a broader understanding of resistance during the Holocaust, challenging the binary notions of victim and perpetrator. As the years progressed, the stories of the Secretaries who delayed deportation orders began to receive the recognition they deserved. In the late 20th century, memorials and educational initiatives emerged to honor the unsung heroes of the Holocaust, including those within the Nazi bureaucracy who had acted against the regime's dehumanizing policies. Museums dedicated to the Holocaust began to feature exhibits that highlighted the moral complexities faced by individuals in positions of power and the impact of small acts of resistance. In Germany, The establishment of the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin in 2005 served as a poignant reminder of the atrocities committed during the Holocaust. The memorial not only commemorated the victims but also encouraged reflection on the responsibilities of individuals within a society. It became a space where the stories of those who resisted, including the Secretaries, could be honored and remembered. Educational programs in schools across Europe began to incorporate lessons on moral courage and the importance of standing up against injustice. The narratives of the Secretaries were woven into discussions about the Holocaust, emphasizing that resistance could take many forms, even within the confines of a bureaucratic system. These educational initiatives aimed to inspire future generations to recognize their own capacity for empathy and action in the face of oppression. The enduring legacy of the Secretaries who delayed deportation orders extended far beyond the immediate post-war years. Their actions became part of a larger discourse on moral responsibility and the role of individuals in combating systemic injustice. As societies around the world grappled with their own histories of oppression, the stories of these Secretaries served as powerful reminders of the importance of individual agency. In the decades following the war, the concept of bystander complicity gained traction in academic and social discussions. The idea that individuals who remain passive in the face of injustice share in the responsibility for the outcomes became a central theme in the study of human behavior during times of crisis. The Secretaries' Defiance highlighted the notion that even small acts of resistance could disrupt the machinery of oppression and save lives. Their legacy inspired countless individuals to question their own roles within systems of power and to consider how they might act in the face of injustice. The narratives of the Secretaries also contributed to the broader understanding of women's roles in resistance movements. Historically, women's contributions to resistance efforts had often been marginalized or overlooked. The recognition of the Secretaries' actions helped to illuminate the vital role that women played in the fight against tyranny, challenging traditional gender norms and inspiring future generations of women to engage in activism and social justice. As the 21st century unfolded, the lessons of the Holocaust and the stories of resistance became increasingly relevant in a world marked by rising authoritarianism, xenophobia, and systemic injustice. The Secretaries' legacy served as a call to action for individuals and communities to stand against oppression in all its forms. Their courage in the face of overwhelming odds became a beacon of hope for those who continue to fight for human rights and dignity today. In contemporary discussions about moral responsibility, the Secretaries' actions remind us that each of us has the power to make a difference, no matter how small our actions may seem. The echoes of their resistance reverberate through time, urging us to confront our own complicity in systems of injustice and to take a stand for those who are marginalized and oppressed. As we reflect on the enduring legacy of the Secretaries who delayed deportation orders, we are reminded that history is not merely a series of events but a tapestry woven from the choices of individuals. Their quiet rebellion against a brutal regime serves as a testament to the enduring power of empathy, courage, and the belief that every life is valuable. In a world still grappling with the shadows of its past, their story remains a vital part of our collective memory, urging us to remember, reflect, and act. In conclusion, the enduring legacy of the Secretaries who defied the Nazi regime is a powerful reminder of the impact of individual choices in the face of systemic evil. Their actions, though often overlooked, contributed to a broader understanding of resistance, moral courage, and the importance of standing up for humanity. As we honor their memory, we are called to reflect on our own responsibilities in the present and to ensure that the lessons of the past are never forgotten.